Hello and welcome to episode 246 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leakes. Damien, how you doing?
I'm good. I am back to normal because I say that after last week's podcast, we went out, or when we recorded last week's podcast, we went out for a meet-up, didn't we, Andy?
I wonder where you're going on this.
And it was a brilliant night. We had a meet-up in a pub in central London, and it was a chance for so many of you to come along, meet us, have a drink, have a chat, have fun, chat to each other. And obviously Pete was there as well from the Meaningful Money podcast. And it was a really good evening. And I think by the next day, I could tell I'd been out the night before. Let's put it that way. So it was a brilliant night. We met so many fun people, and it was great to chat to you, just to hear what you think of the podcast, and also amazed by how far some of the people came.
Yes.
Because some of you who were there last week, I laughed and joked about how useless I am with names. Now, I could meet anybody, and I could tell you everything about them that they tell me, about their family or whatever they've just chatted about, whether it be on holiday, all these things. But if you asked me their name within 10 seconds of them telling me, I am terrible, I wouldn't be able to tell you. And so I was chatting about that to somebody. We were just laughing about it. And I'm just upfront. I would forget people's names, but I don't forget their face or who they are, what they talk to me about. So that's why I looked at you, Andy, because when we were talking about it this week, Andy would say, "Oh, do you remember so-and-so?" And then he'd have to describe the person to me. And I'd go, "Oh, yeah, that was the person who came from Ipswich."
Yeah, I've got this weird thing where I do try and remember names
you mean
as much as possible. Well, yeah, look, you remember the detail, I remember the name. So let's name check some people, shall we? So we had Bob, who came from Manchester. Now, that was pretty impressive.
That was pretty impressive. What was also impressive, Bob went up to Justin, who is my twin, and asked Justin which podcast he listened to, this podcast or Pete's, and why he was there. And Justin said neither, really. Yeah. And Bob was quite confused until Justin pointed out, I'm Damien's twin and we work together, etc. So he's the first person who has never confused me and Justin, pretty much, or not confused, recognised that we look alike. So
he kind of looked over at Justin, looked over at you, and was a little bit confused, but Bob got it. Bob's actually brilliant. We met him at last year's event. Interestingly, something about Bob, he met another guy called Vladimir at our meetup last year, and from last year's event they stayed in contact, and so they used this year's event as another opportunity to meet up, but in London, which is pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. So we're helping people make friends.
We had Christian, who came from Gloucester. That was quite a travel. And we had Peter, and he came all the way from Ipswich. And we had people who were actually worked in the city, but they were working from home on the Friday, but then specifically travelled into London to meet us on the Friday, which confused their other halves no end.
Yeah.
But that's really cool.
That's amazing. And of course, I have to name check Caroline, who is a big fan of the FIRE movement, and we were chatting and showing each other pictures of cats. So that was great to meet Caroline. So thank you all for coming. It means a big deal to us to meet you, because when we do the podcast, we are looking at each other in a room, and it's always nice to be able to get feedback and see the people who like the show, what they want to hear on the show, and just get that sort of feel for all the people that are out there. And of course, don't forget to join our Facebook group, because on our Facebook group this week, I actually asked people, what do you want to hear about on the show? Give me some topics and I can explore. And there's some fantastic suggestions on there, which we'll be looking at in the coming weeks.
Great stuff. And just before we move on to the next section, while we were talking about last week, it wouldn't be right if I didn't mention a guy by the name of Shay. Now, Shay turned up. I think he had a couple of drinks before he met us. An absolute legend of a guy. He made a beeline straight for me and you. And he said, I've heard nothing but your voices in the last 6 weeks. So since we did the live event, it was about 6 weeks ago, he has listened to 245 episodes in that time. And he said he's basically heard nothing but our voices.
And when I worked out how many episodes he must be listening to a day, that is equivalent of something like 4 episodes at least every day for about 6 weeks to be able to do that back catalogue. Yeah, which is amazing. And I think Shay, I admire your dedication to the cause and everything, Money to the Masses, but it might be time to go out and get some fresh air.
Yeah. Right, so what have we got coming up on this week's show?
Right, this week's show, I've got a couple of pieces that are going to be food for thought. So one of them is on feminist economics. So it's a man's world. and I want people to think about something slightly differently. I want to highlight some of the issues around about the way economics is talked about. But there's a personal reason for you out there to listen. So I don't want people just to switch off and be sexist or anything and just think, it's not for me. For everybody out there, there's a conclusion to this piece that is going to be impactful for each person out there, man or woman, to realise that something that they should be thinking about a little bit more. The other piece I want to do is regarding investing, to try and make us better investors. So somebody in the Facebook group talked about some of the behavioural stuff that they really like, and this is about the power of process and the importance and how to make better decisions. So you'll need to listen to that piece. And finally, I want to talk about loans versus credit cards. And it generally is not just credit cards, to be honest, but all types of borrowing. Because broadly speaking, as a rule of thumb, taking out a loan is a better way of borrowing money over sort of unsecured. And I want to explain why, as a rule of thumb, that is the case, and it's something to, again, give people some food for thought.
Good. What are we going to start with?
Let's do the feminist economics. Now, economics is inherently male-dominated, and that's not just in terms of the economists themselves. I mean, it is obviously very male-dominated, and there's only ever been one Nobel Memorial Prize winner in economics that is female. So there's only ever been one. But the idea of feminist economics is trying to bring equality or women more into the equation. Now, economics is meant to be objective, but unfortunately it isn't. It almost could be accused of being the study of money, the system, how that works, and men, fundamentally. Now,
it's funny you should say it. When you mention the word economics, it's just a picture of kind of like, I don't know, nerdy men in a room sort of looking at numbers and spouting out what they know. It's a very male-dominated image I've got.
Yeah, and I don't know why, because there was a study that was done recently, and I was going to cover this on the podcast, but I'm going to just take a tiny part of it. Is it relevant to this piece? There was a study done looking at how financially literate people are around the world. And it was looking at it from country to country, trying to work out if there was any particular trait or reason that one set of people from one country would be more financially literate than another. And the way they did that was to give people some relatively simple, straightforward financial questions, for example, relating to compound interest. So if you had a certain amount of money today, £100 say, and you invested it at a certain rate over a period of time, how much money would you roughly have? And it was trying to work out if they understood some key aspects about economics. And there was an interesting range or disparity between emerging economies and the developed world. And part of that is indicative of the best way to learn about money is to see it and use it. So if you're in a country that is affluent, you're going to have more experience. But what I wanted to pick up on is that in Britain, it was shown that women are more financially literate than men. And that is not only interesting from the fact that what we're talking about in this economics is male dominated, but it bucks the trend of what is seen around the world. And part of that is a symptom of the way that societies work. So that's not saying that generally women are less financially literate than men. It's because of the way societies work, where men tend to dominate and take decisions away from women. But in Britain, the women were still shown to be more financially literate, which is obviously a huge positive. So they ask the questions, why is economics still male dominated? But it's more than just about the more men in the discipline. It's also about the methodology and the focus of economics is still very much orientated on men. And there is the idea that because it's so male dominated and the way we think about it is in terms of men, that we're asking the wrong questions, and it starts to cement inequality more generally in society and in economics. Now, what I mean by that is that we have a habit of ignoring women in economics. And a brilliant example is if you have a measure of economic growth, which is done by something called GDP, gross domestic product, what they will include in that to be able to build that measure is wage labour. So they'll include wages. They'll look at that side of the economy, but they'll completely exclude unpaid work or people that stay at home caring and things like that. That has a huge economic impact and relevance, yet when it comes to official GDP figures, it's completely not recognised. And the problem with that is in society, as it is still now, that women pick up the larger burden of a lot of that unpaid work or care at home. So we're talking about things like staying at home to look after children. And so that's not included in GDP figures. And the reason that that's important is it means that we don't value what they do. So I know there are men that stay at home, but I'm talking about this from a female perspective. It means that officially, if economics doesn't value what is a huge part of the global productivity, the global sort of economy, that there is this unpaid work going on, then they're undervaluing it. That means they're undervaluing the people who do it. And if the people who do it are predominantly women, then they're being undervalued. So that is, in feminist economics, they're trying to get those sorts of things changed, to try and include that in GDP figures and other measures of economic growth and stuff like that. And that is just one important example. But there's lots of ways where economics is actually, the way it is now, is still looking at it through a man's eyes. So there has been claims, quite rightly, that economics was almost designed to keep women in their place, because it's ideas like that sort of stipulate that the man, particularly if you go back in decades past, when it would have been seen that much more that men would have been breadwinners, which is thankfully now starting to change. That is saying that men are much more valued and undervalues what women do. And it also doesn't place much value on things like having well cared for children. They would rather place more value on the value of building cars or crops in anything to do with economics than actually an education of children. So that needs to change. The other important thing about we need to start to ponder about all of this is when we talk about cuts to public sector services, so spending, it actually widens the gender gap. It's an inequality. It impacts women, because if you think about it, if there are certain public services that are pulled back, then the slack has to be picked up by somebody. So that might be whether it's childcare or whatever it is, that has to be picked up by some portion of the population. And still, disproportionately, that is women where that's being picked up. So you may have that the public sector is scaled back on their spending, but it's because there is a portion of society that is actually carrying that slack and picking it up that isn't being recognised. And of course, that then starts to widen any of these inequalities you get, particularly in earnings and things like that, because they're obviously picking up some of that slack. So it matters because economic models are biased, and they also assume they place some assumptions that aren't valid. For example, they may determine that a woman may stay at home because of leisure or consumption preferences, rather than the fact that there is a society forces them to do it. I'm talking broadly here. I'm not talking about individuals. So it's just throwing out there this idea that some of the ways we answer questions, so for example, economics, what's going on in the economy, whether it's growing and all these things, they're inherently biased towards men, and therefore they actually start to amplify some of the problems we've always had. So it does mean we should be trying to look at things differently. And the reason I wanted to do this piece is to get people thinking about that the inequalities that exist out there, but also to look at themselves and realise there are key places in their own financial setup where they have these biases. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to give you one example that I want people to take away from this piece, and it is nothing to do with economics. It is to do with insurance. So if you have a partner, whether male or female, and they are doing maybe an unpaid role, so they are caring for children and bringing them up, there is a huge value on that. And financially, there's a huge value for you, even if you don't see it in terms of pounds and pence. Then maybe they save you on childcare that you're not having to pay for. But more importantly, I'm going to just give an example of a man that's working and a female that's staying at home. That's not because I'm not being sexist or anything. I'm just going to give you the fact that this is what's still being not fully appreciated. If a man was going to go and take out an insurance policy for his life, he may assume that he needs to take a life insurance policy on his own life in case he dies so his family are okay.
Because he's the breadwinner. He's bringing home the bacon.
Exactly.
In his mind.
In his mind. But he's placing no value on what his partner, let's assume it's a female, is doing at home when they're staying at home with the children. So if that person was to die, who is going to look after the children? What impact would that have on the husband to be able to carry on working? What impact would it have on him to be able to care for his children? Who's going to pay for that? And so to place absolutely no value on it is foolish. So I first met Andy when we were in the insurance world, and we used to talk to lots of people about insurance, and when Andy used to advise on insurance. And one of the things that people overlook is the impact that a death, or it could be a long-term sickness or an accident, can have on a spouse who may not be working. And you need to factor that into any plan you have. So whether it's insurance or just broadly in terms of budgeting and earnings and spending, don't just focus on yourself. Focus on people that have what we don't necessarily have a monetary value attached to day in, day out. Just like the economists don't attach any value to people staying at home in terms of economic growth and all that. We are just perpetuating that error. So look at your own finances after you've listened to this piece, and then think, actually, what value does a particular person in your life, it's more likely to be a spouse, have that isn't defined numerically by you at the moment, and then try and define that. And more importantly, work out what would happen if they were unable to do that, because to your household, they have a huge input. Imagine your household was an economy. They have a huge impact on your GDP. And it's like people who start businesses. They'll be out there starting businesses and they'll be driving them forward, but they aren't able to do that unless they have somebody who is backing them up. And it may be at home that is taking the lion's share of all the other stuff that they aren't even engaging with because they're too busy driving their business forward. And it's too easy for everybody to overlook that. So it's a bit of this piece was all about trying to think differently.
It's a really interesting point you bring up because, like you say, we've got that experience in the insurance world. I know the value of a non-working spouse. And if we can get the message out there and other people can put that value and start making a difference. And actually that kind of ties back into what you were saying in the beginning. Will that have a knock-on effect? And do you think that might actually impact the wider problem of the gender bias and the gap that there is in the economy?
Yeah, well, it should do. If individuals start thinking about how they have these inherent biases, and they don't have to beat themselves up, they just have to be aware that they exist and that it's like anything in life. If you're aware of an issue or problem or way of thinking, that's how you change it. And so if we individually start changing it, then it will start to feed up, and it will start to feed up the line into wider thinking, into political thinking, into government thinking, into economics. If you think about it as a parallel to what's happening with lots of the environmental awareness, we're getting people who are younger maybe, or people who are just becoming more aware of the issues, then they are starting to put it out there, and one by one you start to have a bit of a snowball effect. So I think it's a very valid point.
Good stuff. What are we moving on to?
The power of process and decision making. Now, this piece is aimed at investing and also decision making more generally. So if you're not into investing, this is still relevant to you. But it's about decision making when there is uncertainty of the outcome. Now, when we make decisions, we judge a decision, and it's just us being human, we judge a decision, whether it was correct or not. We have an outcome bias. And that means that we look at a decision and we look at the outcome, and therefore we make whether it was good or bad, a function of that outcome. So to give you an example, there was a book that was written called The Little Book of Behavioural Investing by James Montier. It's a very good book. If you get the chance, have a look at it. Lots of sort of snippets about investing, and some of this stuff is about biases and about the importance of process is highlighted in there. And he gives in that book a very good example to highlight what I'm talking about. If you imagine there is a surgeon, for example, and he may have a patient that comes to him with a set of or series of ailments in terms of symptoms. It could be they have pain that's stopping them being able to carry out their job or impair their life somewhat. It's not life and death, but it may be the fact it's having a very detrimental impact on their life, and it could potentially maybe have some future bigger problems. They decide to go and have surgery. So let's say it was a surgery maybe on their heart or something, but something that maybe is a bit more routine. But with that operation that should hopefully improve the patient's life, there is a chance, let's say about a 10% chance, that patient might die, or even if it was a smaller percentage. Now, assuming that that patient has the operation, it all goes to plan, and the patient makes a full recovery, the decision of that surgeon to say, yep, do you know what? You need to go down this route and have this operation because your life will be better for it. That would have been deemed a very successful and correct decision and everybody would be happy. But of course, there is that 10%. If the person had died during that operation, then when they sat back in the cold light of day, anybody who is looking at that decision might start to question it was a wrong decision, because they might look at it and say, well, the person wasn't going to die from the issues they were having. Yes, their life was slightly more impaired, but now they're dead. And so what that is, that's that outcome bias. You base a decision, the correctness of a decision is determined by the outcome. Yet in that instance, all the facts were known up front, the outcomes were different, yet we have a different opinion. And so that is important when we come to investing or any types of decision making that we do. So we will always look backwards at a decision we made and say that was a bad decision because the outcome was something we didn't like. But that is wrong, because if you focus on outcomes as a way of judging how good a decision was, it will start to lead you down a road of making almost predetermined decisions. So, for example, if we take the investment world, if you make decisions about where you're going to invest based on outcomes that you had, then people start to move towards decisions that have loss aversion embedded in them. So that's a bias. So you'll start to try and make decisions that stop you losing money because the outcome previously wasn't great. Or you start to opt for compromise options, which means you start to pick things that are kind of middle ground and you're trying not to, you're basically compromising. Now, in the investment world, that might be you start hugging an index. You start doing things where you don't try and do something because it's right. You just do it because it feels comfortable. And you see that in fund managers. It happens all the time. That's why they all start to just become, they don't all, that's a little bit unfair, but there is a tendency for them to start to head towards being just expensive trackers. But as individuals, that is the same thing. We have the idea that when we try and make an investment, we will start to move towards things that would be loss aversion or maybe compromise options. And that might be we just pick indices and stuff like that. That's not to say that it is a wrong decision. It's the decision is questionable if it's based purely on an outcome. So what you need to do is start to focus on a process, because process tends to give better outcomes. And now, to give you an example of why this works, a process is where the way you make a decision follows a routine. So there is a way you do it. Now, there was an example that was given actually by James Montier, which was to do with two products. Imagine if you worked in a company and there were two products you were trying to launch in a new market somewhere. And so it might be in a foreign market. You had product A and product B, and you had to make a choice that you were going to put £10 million behind product A or product B and launch it into this new market that you're trying to enter. If when you did that, assuming as part of this role play, that when the results came back from how well product A did, you'd invested 10 million into product A, it flew off the shelves, but then the sales eventually lowered and settled at a relatively low level. At the same time, product B, without this £10 million input that you were going to put in to try and drive sales, that had done a similar thing, but the product sales eventually settled at a slightly higher level. It didn't have your initial push from all that money you spent, but when it came to it at the end, this settled at a slightly higher level. When you looked at that, the board room had said to you that basically wasn't a great decision that you think you made there because it based it on the outcome. They then, as part of this scenario, if you imagine you were then given some more money, another £10 million, and said, right, what we're going to do this time, you're going to have to make a decision of how you're going to spend that money across these two products. But what we'll do is this time the outcome that happens is going to be widely publicised to lots of people about your successes and failures, what you do, and it will be used as a case study among students and academics and everybody. The alternative, if they didn't say that, let's imagine they said to you, what we'll do is the process of which you made the decision, how you arrived at the decision will be used and sort of widely publicised. When they gave you that scenario where there was a focus on the way you made the decision, the process, rather than just the outcome, what people tended to do after the initial failure was when it was just on an outcome, they then tended to back their original view again. They took their budget that they had this time around and still spent most of it on product A, because that's what they thought at the beginning, and they wanted to back that conviction that they had. What happened is the people who were aware that the scenario was told to, because it was done to a group of people who they gave the scenario and see how they would spread their money, all sort of hypothetical. Where the people were told they were going to look at the process at which they arrived at it, the decisions they were making were much more balanced. They started to spend more money on the product B as a result. So the point of that exercise was just to show what would happen if you focus more on outcomes or you focus more on process. And if you focus more on a process, what it tends to do is it tends to produce better decisions, because you're making decisions objectively, because what you're not worrying about is you're not worrying about the uncertainties that can arise. So in the investment world, that's like the uncertainties of returns. So if you focus on process, you get better decisions.
Surely, using that process, it's surely easier then to measure your results as well, because you've got a consistent approach.
Well, you're bang on, Andy. And that is a very valid point, because what you're doing is you're almost testing and learning about how you make the decision, how you arrive somewhere. And I mean, I'll give you a good example of this. 80-20 Investor is all about process, okay? It's about applying a momentum process to a way of investing. Now, we do other things, obviously research articles and all those things, again, apply different process, but the core of 80-20 with the momentum is about applying a process. By applying that process, that doesn't mean you're always going to make money. Because of the uncertainty of investment markets, that is just the way they go. There's lots of uncertainties out there in terms of return, influenced by all sorts of things like macro events, even Donald Trump and what he does. But following a process starts to free you from the worry of all those uncertainties to make you make bad decisions. Because what will happen if you keep making decisions based on the outcomes, you'll more likely make bad decisions. And to give you more of an idea on this, I sometimes have been asked of people who say, can you compare how much you made from your portfolio over a period of time compared to, say, a particular fund or something like that? Now, of course, you're always going to get to the point where you can find a fund that will have made more money than I have over sort of coming up for 4.5 years, or a bit over 4.5, nearly 5 years. Because what you have to think about, the decision process, go back to that point in March 2015 when markets were at all-time highs. And the decision you had, or I had, at that point was how to invest. It's not only do I invest £50,000 now, it's what do I invest in? How do I pick one that's going to do well? So that was a decision process. Had I based it on previous outcomes, maybe of other people and about what happens at market highs and a lot of the stuff you read in the press, I probably wouldn't have invested any money because you're thinking the market's going to crash. But by having a process of decision making, which on this instance was how I use an 80-20 investor, I then ended up getting to the point where I have made over 30% in 4.5 years, and that's profit. Because I kept following a process. Sometimes it makes you make really uncomfortable decisions. You buy things when you think, I'm really not sure I want to buy that, based on all those emotions that are linked to, again, the uncertainty of returns. So by doing that, then I was able to outperform so many fund managers. But of course, you're going to find a few that will always outperform, because my portfolio is being built of a collection of those. I'm picking the best funds. There's always going to be some that will beat what I do, because I didn't know at 2015 which fund, with the benefit of hindsight, now we're at November 2019, would be the best fund. If I did, I would have just picked that fund. It would have been like the Back to the Future thing, where
your crystal ball would be worth millions.
Yeah, it'd be worth millions. So it was the decision making process was how I got to where I am. It wasn't the ability to make a decision based on previous outcomes that would cause me to fear loss or make me be biased towards certain things. It was about being absolutely objective. Now, it doesn't matter if whatever your process is, it doesn't have to be 80-20 investing. It could be value investing, for example. It could be smaller companies investing. These processes of investing have been shown to work over longer periods of time. If you keep to that process, then you have a much more likelihood of making better decisions. It doesn't guarantee you're going to have a positive outcome, but over the longer term, you're more likely to have the outcomes that you want, being a successful investor. And to give you another element of that, when I buy and sell funds, I don't do it with reference to how much I bought it for. So this idea of crystallising losses, and people say you should never crystallise a loss. But I personally don't believe that's the case. Sometimes you're better off crystallising a loss if you follow a process whereby that is what the process dictates you do to invest in a better opportunity. If you just sell something, crystallise a loss purely because of fear and the fact that you didn't like the outcome, that's not a process. And so what you need to do is, if you think about a grid, okay, where you've got a good outcome in one column, a bad outcome on the other, and you then had on the horizontals a good process and a bad process. If you've got a good process, a process that you're happy with, that you've tested, whatever that process might be, and you get a good outcome, then that's basically a deserved success, because you followed a process that is a good process. It isn't something that is not being tried or tested, or you haven't improved over time. Then that's a deserved success. If you have a good process but a bad outcome, so the market tumbles, I've had them when we invest, just the market suddenly turns. That's bad luck. That's just the way it works. That's the uncertainty coming in. The difference is, if you have no process or bad process in decision making, then if you have a good outcome, that's just what they call dumb luck. So imagine if you go and you're betting on horses all the time, and you're going and you're spending all your money, and then you get a winner. You're a gambler. They will talk about their good outcomes, which is just dumb luck, and they might think that they will talk about that as if they somehow, they're the winners, they know what they're doing. The reality is they don't have a process. The process is bad because they're just betting randomly on everything, aren't they? They're just addicted to gambling. Equally, if you have a bad process and a bad outcome, that is fundamentally just justice. So somebody like gamblers, when they keep losing, that is because they keep gambling money. On the flip side of that, if you want to take gambling as an example, a good process is what bookies do, or if you're in a casino, the house always wins because on the roulette wheel, there is the 0, isn't there? So they will always, over the long term, win. That's a good process. And so therefore the good outcome is deserved, but when somebody wins big and they're down for the night, well, that's just bad luck. So the point is that you need to review. If you do make decisions, you need to look at your process for decision making. You're going to end up having decisions that aren't going to go your way. That doesn't make them bad decisions. That makes the outcome not what you wanted. So in investing, it's important to differentiate the thing between bad outcomes and bad decisions. You can get a terrible outcome, but the decision, if you go back, my way I look at it is, if I went back to the exact point with the information that I had on that day, would I make the same decision again? If the answer is yes, it wasn't a bad decision, it was just a bad outcome. And something to leave you like food for thought is that if you want to look at a process, the time to reflect on the process and whether it's working and whether it's any good is when it's winning. Because what will tend to happen is we will doubt a process. This is a process for investing, a process for making decisions, when it's not going our way. And so you need to, when it's going your way, you need to look at it. So when that person won the Grand National, when they won all that money and they were jumping up and down, they should have looked at it and gone, is what I'm doing working? Is it right?
But again, looking at that process objectively on the process itself, not having had the foresight of actually knowing that it was winning or wasn't.
Yeah. So that person who won big, they will look at that and they'll think, yeah, I've got a process. But if they're objective, they realise they haven't, because they've been losing big forever. They haven't got a process at all. And so that is the time to then reflect and say, maybe this wasn't a deserved success. This was just dumb luck. And that's the point at which you can then change your process and try and improve it, because it's only at that point where you've got to be self-reflective when you're winning at anything. So it's investing, you've got to reflect and go, am I winning because of something that I'm doing in a process, or am I winning just because of just dumb luck? Or equally, when things don't go your way, you've got to reflect and say, is it because of something I'm doing wrong, or is this just bad luck? So you've got to reflect on all of these things. So the message of this whole part is the outcome of a decision shouldn't be the only thing you use to reflect on whether that decision was right or a good decision or a wrong decision. It's important to think about the process at which you arrive at any decision you make, whether it's investing, whether it's buying a house or anything like that. And I always remember, this is off just a complete random thing. I'm not sure whether this is particularly useful to people, but I always remember my dad saying, if you can get to 7 out of 10 on a decision-making process that he would say you wanted to go and buy something. If you can get to 7 out of 10, then that's good enough. You've got there, because you're never going to be 10 out of 10 on anything. So your process of making a decision got to this point. I was happy with it. I made a decision. Then you're never going to get the right outcome.
Yeah, I always look at these things in weight loss terms, because I'm constantly yo-yoing, and I have a process, and my process of losing weight is whatever it is, but I stick to it. And I don't obsess about the results. So if I've only lost half a pound 1 week, or if I haven't even made a loss, I don't worry. I stick to my process. And what almost certainly always happens is if you stick to that process, just because you haven't lost weight for a couple of weeks, you'll find the next week you might lose 4 or 5 pounds. And it's that process of and you know then that it is working.
Yeah,
because if you jump around and switch diets and stop doing it or fall off the wagon, you never really know what's working.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic example, Andy. You just hit the nail on the head. You summed up better than I did. That is a really good example of, if you've got a process of how you're trying to do something, just because you had a failure at some point doesn't mean you have to chuck the process out. The process is something that is based on factual, that has been shown to work. You know it works because of the theory behind it all. Then why chuck it out? It just means you've got to stick with it. So it's brilliant.
Good. So what are we going to finish off?
I'm conscious of the time, Andy, so it's going to be a very quick piece anyway. This is about loans versus other types of unsecured debt. And it's just something to get people to think about, a rule of thumb, that generally speaking, borrowing on loans is a better way of borrowing if you wanted to borrow money already in debt than credit cards, loans and overdrafts. Now, I'm going to caveat that because I know all about 0% balance transfer cards. In fact, I use them. And the 0% purchase on credit cards, fantastic. They work. If you are financially astute and financially literate and all these things, then knock yourself out. Go down that road to be able to borrow money and be able to run down your debt. But the reason why I say this is that there are 2 reasons why loans can be better. Is that firstly, the standard loan interest rate on a sort of standard loan is normally lower than the default rate on a credit card. So that's your first one. And the other main thing is that when you repay a loan, you're repaying capital and interest. What tends to happen with credit cards, for example, is that you're paying the minimum amount, which doesn't really clear the capital and the interest. It just ends up chipping away at the interest that you're accruing on that debt, which is what the credit cards want you to do. So if you pay the minimum amount each month, that debt just keeps getting rolled over almost forever. So first of all, you need to not pay the minimum, you need to pay more than that. But it's a benefit of a loan because you've basically got a final end date. You're chipping away at more than just the interest rate. But the reason that the loan is always an interesting option, it's one to think about, is because the credit card route is this, again, I'm not trying to, I use the gambling analogy, but they use it as a way to hook you in. So the teaser rates, the 0% free periods, they're gateways in which they then suck you in. Now, this is about understanding who you are as a person and what you're like and how you behave in certain scenarios. So, for example, I don't have a reward credit card. And people in the office sit there and like you guys go, why don't you have a reward credit card? Or people will be saying, oh, I've got millions of air miles because of my spend on credit cards. And for me, it's a personal reason because I know that the idea of those is to suck you in, is to spend on credit cards over and over and over and over again. And in doing so, you then get into that spiral where there's a danger that you don't repay it at the end of the month, and then you get into that debt trap. And so for me as an individual, I am nervous of them, and I tend to rather just pay the money, not have the rewards, because it's a way of them sucking you in. It's a bit like you start getting into gambling, you start getting all these offers and incentives to start using things like online roulette wheels that you never even dreamt of, and you get sucked into that road. And personally, credit cards and all of those things tend to have more of that. I mean, overdrafts are expensive. These things all have their uses. But just as a rule of thumb, you have to be very clear when you're using the other types of unsecured debt like credit cards. You have to be very stick to a process. You have to sit there and be very, very strict with yourself and know you can be. Because if you're not, that's geared towards you failing in a way. And so therefore loans have that advantage where they don't tend to have those options and you'll clear your debt. There you go.
Good stuff. Right, we're done. I suppose we better do the housekeeping. So if you want to get in touch with Damien, it is damien@moneytothemasses.com. You can get in touch with me if you like. It's andy@moneytothemasses.com. We're all over Facebook, Instagram. Don't forget to join our group on Facebook. You can find that by going to facebook.com/groups/money to the masses, and you'll find us. YouTube as well.
Yeah, big on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Actually, we've started to upload a few of the bits that we actually record from this podcast. So if you want to see Damien and I sitting next to each other and how we kind of deliver this podcast, I don't know why you'd want to, but some people might.
Yeah, go and have a look. It'll be on our social media channels as well. But we're doing more and more of it on YouTube because we realise people consume it in different ways.
Yes, that's it. Until next time.
Until next time.